British Art Show 9, Hayward Gallery Touring's landmark exhibition of contemporary art, opened in Aberdeen Art Gallery on the 10th of July. When it leaves, it will go on to tour 3 further cities: Wolverhampton, Manchester and Plymouth. Each show will be slightly different. Designed, curators Irene Aristizabal and Hamad Nassar tell us to reflect the different contexts, cultural and economic and social landscapes of each of these very different UK cities. For Aberdeen, the curators chose 33 artists whose work explores different forms of knowledge, including spirituality, to heal the earth, to resist the injustices of extractivism, and to develop non-exploitative ways of living with the non-human. On hearing this theme, and in particular the word extractivism, it is impossible not to think of the extent to which so much of Aberdeen's identity is derived from its association with extractive industries, oil and gas and granite, and therefore to assume that the artists have been selected for Aberdeen because of references to these industries in their work. Now this is in part true, but not for the reasons you might assume. For example, where oil and gas is directly referenced, as in Catherine Boehm's distinctive taped-together paper patchworks, it is part of an open, multi-layered visual conversation, incorporating slogans, diagrams and messages. This multi-layered approach, everything pasted or pinned to a wall, tries to convey a sense of the whole. It reminds me of an investigation or research project, bringing new and different angles to the debate. Oil and gas is referenced, but it is one topic of conversation amongst many, as Boehm's practice seems more about demonstrating the power of art and culture as vehicles for conversation, rather than as the arbiters of public opinion per se. Likewise, the other of the region's major extractive industries, granite quarrying, receives attention in Florence Peake's Crude Care. Peake's red-glazed ceramic floor piece is a testimony to her curiosity and even fascination for the process of quarrying and extraction. She has described the granite city itself as an inversion of the massive holes mined to enable its creation. In Crude Care, Peake has reflected on the extractive process itself, creating new work out of her own process, wherein Aberdeen care worker Earl Solomon was first entombed in wet clay before working with Peake to be gently extracted, an experience Solomon describes as profound, birth-like and almost spiritual. Similar to quarrying, this process left its own impact on the wet clay. It peeled it back, it tore it, it was ripped, it was squashed. And all of this is recorded forever, now the pieces have been fired at Gray's School of Art. It seems to me that these aspects of our city's industrial story appealed to both Boehm and Peake as means of expression, enabling them to explore and expand on creative practices they are both already invested in. But extractivism comes in many guises, as is documented in Maeve Brennan's new iteration of her ongoing project, The Goods. This title purposefully reminds us of criminal slang for stolen property, but the goods in question in Brennan's piece are not mobile phones or designer handbags. Instead, she is referencing a black market underworld where the goods are antiquities and cultural objects, all quite literally extracted from their rightful owners and homelands. The Goods is a series of films, photographs and billboards which takes an in-depth look at the international traffic in looted cultural objects. Particularly striking are the many times magnified Polaroid images of pottery fragments from the 4th century BC, which were found amongst 45 crates of stolen antiquities. How many other objects have been stolen and not recovered, we ask ourselves. Where are they now? Quite likely lost to the world forever. Brennan works in collaboration with archaeologists to document discoveries and investigations into this illegal trade that remarkably represents the third biggest global black market economy after weapons and drugs. For me, the most explicit evocation, however, of the injustices of extractivism can be experienced in Elaine Michener's impactful sound piece cited in the Art Gallery's top floor special exhibition space. Presented as a private chapel for contemplation, with photographic images of Michener's physical performances appropriately displayed in stained glass suspensions, this piece confronts the shameful history of human extraction and brutal realities of the transatlantic trade in slaves and sugar. The sound piece you can hear is an excerpt from a bigger project called Sweet Tooth. Michener recites the names and allocated monetary values of enslaved African people owned by the 18th century British planter Simon Taylor. He purchased 2,000 slaves, gave them English names instead of their birth names. This roll call or inventory of goods is the only physical surviving record of enslaved men, women and children who were extracted from homeland and families and forced to endure appalling conditions in order to satisfy a demand for sweet sugar. It is chilling to discover that it would take more than 3 hours to recite all 2,000 names, and this is just for the slaves owned by one planter. The enormity and scale of the trade in human beings is hard to comprehend. While the theme of extractivism links Boehm's, Peake's, Brennan's and Michener's work and several others in the show, the work of other artists helps us to appreciate more fully other key Aberdeen themes. For example, healing the earth and developing non-exploitative ways of living with the non-human converge in the work of cooking sections and their ongoing project Climavore. Climavore advocates placing climate emergency and environmental well-being at the heart of strategic planning around our food economy and ecology. For example, on the Isle of Skye, Cooking Sections works to move the economy away from salmon farming to one based on filter feeders and seaweeds, which are vital in maintaining the area's intertidal ecosystems. The intention behind the project is illustrated so well in the salmon fan displayed on the art gallery's ground floor. This simple, innocuous-looking device is in fact packed full of meaning and hugely relevant to the themes of healing the earth and non-exploitative ways of living with the non-human, as the fan displays the many shades of pink dye injected into farmed salmon to improve their appearance and commercial viability. While there may be more than one theme in the Aberdeen show, the work of all 33 artists converges on their collective exploration of different forms of knowledge. This factor links together all three Aberdeen themes. But what exactly is meant by different forms of knowledge? To me, this certificate from Aberdeen Archive Gallery and Museum's collection for proficiency in Bible knowledge encapsulates much of what I personally think is meant by different forms of knowledge. Young Alexander Craig was awarded this certificate in 1932 for being able to prove he could retain knowledge about a subject that itself existed through faith rather than fact. This certificate reminds us that knowledge can be rational, it can be officially sanctioned and accredited and received through training and education, as per young Alexander's certificate. But it can also be received and acquired as a result of upbringing, individual and communal experience, and via faith, as per the subject of young Alexander's certificate. The value of exploring and being open to non-traditional, even non-provable forms of knowledge is at the heart of Grace Indiritu's practice. In British Art Show, Indiritu shows a silent film called Community, which takes viewers on a tour around some of the communes the artist has experienced and lived in Britain. These include Findhorn Eco Village near Inverness, the Salisbury Centre in Edinburgh, and the Hare Krishna Ashram in rural Lesmahago. These experiences of alternative communities enable the artist to explore different ways of thinking about art, science, spirituality and politics, practicing what she has described herself as non-traditional methodologies, such as yoga and shamanism, activities that emit energetic power and demand personal connection as a means of releasing new ways of thinking and understanding, and to show a different way forward, a world apart from young Alexander Craig's formal Bible training. But Ndiritu's practice isn't just about meditation for meditation's sake. Instead, her overriding aim is to be a change maker and problem solver. The issues she directs these new ways of thinking and non-traditional forms of knowledge at are the major issues of our time: decolonisation, climate change, and the refugee crisis. The performance project, called A Meal for My Ancestors, is a case in point. Project participants included members of the UN and EU parliaments, activists, and refugees. Together, they used food, shamanism, and meditation to form common bonds and instigate a process of healing as opposed to condemnation and recrimination. Later this year, Grace hopes to return to Aberdeen to create a community of people collectively acting under the banner Plant Theatre for Plant People. Through learning derived from meditative practices, bonding exercises, and yoga, participants will connect with plants in the spirit of ecological activism. Again, collective learning and non-traditional forms of knowledge to enact change. Patrick Goddard's film Animal Antics is an equally comical and meaningful reflection on man's relationship with the world. He uses the sphere of the non-rational. In this instance, a conversation between a talking poodle and his human owner during a day trip to the zoo. He uses this to highlight the differences between knowledge acquired as a result of nature and that derived through nurture. The dog asks his owner, "What is wild? Are zoo animals pedigree?" His species' original understanding of the world has been bred and trained out of them. Domestication has divorced him from original knowledge. The experience of watching the absurd forces us as viewers to think about what forms of knowledge we as a species have moved on from, left behind, and forgotten. Are we a richer or poorer species as a result of this? Similarly, was Alexander Craig richer in terms of knowledge because he passed a test or because he believed? What the artists in British Art Show 9 collectively remind us of is that knowledge can change and develop. It can also be manipulated, corrupted, and forgotten. They also remind us that knowledge is power, and because of this, there will always be winners and losers. And while the show may change when it leaves Aberdeen and travels on to Wolverhampton, Manchester, and Plymouth, this understanding and appreciation of knowledge will, I believe, hold true for all iterations of the show.